Okay, I won't make you sing because we ran out of time. Um, we are at the man blind from birth. So Jesus healed on the Shabbat, on Sabbath, the man that was blind from birth. They don't tell us exactly where the setting is, but it's most likely, just like all the other Jonian things, after Jesus went to Jerusalem, it's most likely in Jerusalem. We have the same players, and we've gotten to the point they had Jesus healed him. That's a sign, Simeon, and there's a huge fight at this point about if there's just a huge fight at this point. So there, obviously, there is some question because suddenly you have a guy who was blind from his birth that sees. And so they asked his parents to come in, and that's where we were. They were the parents, according to the Judeans belonging to Judea, were not convinced of a logical argument, threw all over of him that he had been dark from I spoke, that he had been blind. So they were not convinced that he had been blind and that he had.
Did they think he'd been faking it in his whole life? I don't understand this.
It's a different person, right? That's somebody else.
It's not the right guy.
Okay. Well, because there are some miracles that are astounding miracles. You know, let's see, how can explain this? I've told you before that the ancient worldview of people who are ill, you know, we translate quite incorrectly that Jesus was healing the sick. To us, healing the sick means people with, you know, flu and cancers and other things. But there's no perception of that at all. They believe that people were cursed or injured. And, you know, an injury could be the result of a curse, right? So you're hauling a thing of wood and all of a sudden a part of the load comes loose and crushes your arm. Well, whose fault is that? You know, it's your fault. You could be cursed. It could be fate, right? The Greeks are all into fate. And by the way, all of history was big time into fate until Victorian era. Victorian era really changed the world. Well, the Romantic era following the Victorian era really changed the world's view of a lot of stuff. But this gets complicated, right? Because history, we are living in our era of history. We see the world through our eyes and through our understanding of the world. But in the ancient days, if you were sick, you were cursed. People might send your child to the Asclepion, where they weren't cared for, fed, or anything until the Christians started taking over the Asclepions, which I think is remarkably ironic. You know, the first hospitals were where people were abandoned because of their illnesses. We don't see the world that way, and we've translated the New Testament in a way that meets our modern moral views. This guy, okay, if somebody comes with, I'm sick, I'm coughing, I don't know what I have, maybe I have cancer, and Jesus, it doesn't say he heals them, it says that he, what's the word, he basically takes care of them. He nurses them is a better translation than healing. He nurses them. So we don't know exactly what he was doing, but we guess that he made whatever their ailments were go away, right? Get better. But realize that in the ancient world, okay, you know, we think about lepers, right? Lepers have an obvious illness. So guess what they did to them? Yeah, banished them, isolated them. The Asclepions were, you know, if you're coughing too much, the people would probably look at you. It's not like they say put a face guard on now, right? It's like, okay, why aren't you in the Asclepion, right? But yet you have someone who's physically, you know, the man's eyes, obviously he couldn't, you know, it looked like he was blind, right? His eyes were white or they were obviously not right. the guy who was crippled, right? That Jesus healed. Maybe his leg was completely. Yeah, and you could, there was a guy that Jesus healed, I think in Matthew, in the temple, who had an arm that was totally, stick-like, and he touched him, and it made it better. These are, in the ancient world, when you see that, you go, ha, ha. But yeah, someone who has cancer, I mean, you're lucky in the military to get even treated for cancer. It's like it's socialized medicine. So, sayonara, But this is really interesting, and I think the obviousness of this miracle, it's obvious. This guy was blind from birth. How can you heal someone who has never seen before at all, and obviously looks like they can't see? And so this has caused a controversy, even greater than the previous controversy. The previous controversy was the guy who was lame. It says what, lame for 40 years, 30 years, something like that, right? So, the lameness, in a Greek worldview, you're cursed, but it was a causal thing and it's obvious. Now, if you went to war and you got stuck and injured, right? That's not a curse. That means that you were protecting the nation. I mean, these are positive things. And by the way, they treated those. Well, they'd almost always try to treat injuries that they could. But what do they do, right? Anyway, I'm reading a book about the turn of the century. I guess they finally had anesthesia, but they talk about surgeries. Yeah, can you imagine? Picture stick? Yeah. But they were talking about appendicitis, and you're like, oh, okay. Anyway, they looked up during at which time they emitted a sound to his parents, and the word in the Greek means his male ancestors. We presume that when they say his parents, his mother came too, but that's not what it says in the Greek. But that's cool. His male ancestors. What does that mean? In our worldview, your parents, mommy and daddy, right? But in the Greek and also the Hebrew worldview at the time, especially the Greek worldview, it's going to be, your uncle, your dad, your grandfather. It's a different way of looking at the world. Is this your son, they ask? Is this the one you say was born blind? This is the NIV. How is it that now he can see? Let's see, of course, we know it's a little bit different. They asked him, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then doth he now see? Okay, let me pull it down here, and let's look at what the Greek is actually saying. And this is erotisan. They made an earnest request. We see this used a lot in John. I don't remember this being used much in Mark or Matthew. I haven't looked at Luke in quite the same way as I have in the other Gospels. Maybe I should do Luke at some time. Made an earnest request, especially by someone on a special footing. We see this word used a lot. This is the no kidding question word, or a question, a questioning in a like I said, earnest request of them, making a logical argument. Is he the offspring? Is he your offspring? Of whom make a logical argument that or because Tiflos raises smoke, he was beget, procreated a descendant, produced an offspring, in a passive case, be born. In what way or how much, certainly accordingly, does he look at just now at this moment? And they made an earnest request of them, making a logical argument. He is your offspring, of whom you make a logical argument, that darkened by smoke he was born. This is a little bit different.
This one sounds accusatory.
Yeah,
You
and
claim that.
well, and there's no. Remember, I told you in the Greek, although there was a modern source that cracked me up that said you could tell by the question mark. There is no question marks, right? But there is not the tis. There is no question word here. So who, what, where, how. there is a specific word in Greek, like on means a supposition. I think it's tis or t, that means a question. And so there is no use of a question word. So this isn't a question. This is an accusation. He is your offspring, of whom you make a large garment, the dark by smoke. He was born. So they are not really asking, they're specifying or saying straight out that he is your offspring, but they're making a large garment that he was born blind. Okay? So the question is, accordingly, in what way does he look at this moment? I should have another comment there. How does he look at this moment? In other words, that is good. How does he see? But like I said, I leave it in the specific Greek. How does he look at this moment? That's a question. Mary, is there a question word? No, there isn't a question word in that. Actually, there is. Pos. That in what way or how much? And they make an earnest request to them. Let's see. No, we're going down here. We know he is our son. The parents answered. And we know he was born blind. By the way, why do you think that, although this says parents, it means male descendants, why do you think they wouldn't ask mama in this culture?
Woman's word wasn't accounted as much as men's requested.
Right. And what's going to be really interesting, though, when we get to Lazarus, there is some really interesting stuff about old Lazarus and about the action of women. By the way, we know this because who's the smartest person in all the New Testament? I think. Anyway. The one at the well, in my opinion, is the smartest cookie of anyone, male or female, in all the New Testament. She was right on the money. And by the way, she said stuff, we're going to find out, okay, in here, she said stuff that would have got her she wasn't in the synagogue, that would have got her pumped, right, dumped. She would have been out of there because of what she said, which is really interesting. That John puts it, that it is the Samaritan woman that says this stuff. But anyway, so his parents answered him and said, we know this is our son, and he was born blind. So that's what the Greek says. It's just interesting how, we're trying to make it more into our English so that it's better for us. These are not convoluted sentences in Greek at all. They're very straightforward sentences in Greek, but just the way that they're put together to us when we see them, without being massaged. I'm trying not to massage them much so that we get the full feeling of what it's saying. They conclude for themselves. There's the word that we almost always see. They conclude for themselves, certainly according the parents, male ancestors of him, and they said, we see with physical eyes, that are because he is the offspring of us. And that are because, to raise a smoke, hence darkened by smoke, blind, he was beget. He was beget. Certainly his parents concluded for themselves, and they said, we see with physical eyes that he is our offspring, and that he born dark by he was, it doesn't say, I should have put he was. I'm missing a was. He was born, past tense, darkened by smoke, blind. So they ask, but how can he see now? Or who opened his eyes? We don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. Okay. We got the beginning, right? We got the sign. Do you see what you see how the readers of this, or the hearers of this, right? I mean, this is pure Greek entertainment, even though I think it's totally historical. But the way that John is putting this together for us, it is pure Greek entertainment. It is beautiful, beautiful writing in Greek in itself, because you get the action, right? This is really similar to the previous Semaia where Jesus healed the guy who was paralyzed, right, for years. He healed him. Jesus says, hey, peripato, carry your mattress and walk around on Sabbath, knowing that was going to cause issues, right? And what they do, they said, the first thing they said, who told you you could carry your mattress, right? In this case, we get Jesus healing them, and they're like, who is this guy? What? We got to have a tribunal to determine, was this guy blind from birth? And now, what are we going to do? We got to find the criminals that healed him. And heal them on the Shabbat, on Sabbath, right? I mean, what a horrible thing that you would heal somebody on the Shabbat. By the way, totally legal under the Mishnah, which I think is very ironic. We don't see this irony because we don't see how ironic this is. Why do you think they suddenly cared about healing on the Sabbath in this sense?
That's all they had.
What's that?
That's all they had.
Well, I'd put it this way. They had never seen, it's kind of like Penn and Teller. I've loved Penn and Teller's kind of philosophy of the world. Why does the witch doctor, why is it people trust the witch doctor? Well, if people are sick or ill with anything, there's three outcomes. You can die, you can not get better, just stay where you are, or you can get healed, right? So the witch doctor comes and you have a cold and he shakes this thing over, right? And then 7 days later, you're like, oh, I'm healed, right? Or 7 days later, you're dead, right? Well, he was cursed. Nothing you can do about it, right?
You can make whatever outcome that you can, explain away everything.
Yeah, but instead, what do we have? We have a guy, it's not like he's doctoring, right? He's not sewing up, an artery or a vein or using oil and hot stuff.
He spit on dirt and rubbed it on his eyes.
Yeah, he took part of the cosmos, right? And made this guy see. And so all of a sudden, all these Pharisees are suddenly confronted with, no kidding, a miracle, right? This is a miraculous thing. This isn't something within the cosmos. It's something that comes from outside the cosmos. C.S. Lewis, I think it's Mere Christianity, where he writes all about the whole point about miracles and about magic, which always blows me away because, as C.S. Lewis writes, anytime an author brings up magic comes from within the creation. The minute you start talking about magic, what do you got to start talking about? The miracles that come from without the creation. So Harry Potter always cracks me up because it's all about magic. But how does it work? You can't talk about magic without talking about miracles. Because magic comes from Satan, right? From the devil. So you can't have magic unless you're worshiping the prince and power of the world. But you can have miracles if you're talking about God. This is really interesting stuff. But you have people confronted with a real miracle. They've never seen this before. They've never had to use that thing about, healing on a Shabbat. Never had to use it. Because, maybe somebody had a really bad injury and you called in the doctor, right, or the surgeon, or what they called in those days. But, that would sew up your cut and reset your bone, and that's cool. That's totally legal. But that's not what we have. We have somebody who actually healed miraculously.
It reminds me of the media today, like whenever there's anything good that conservatives do or whatever, they just somehow spin it to be bad. So, they find an explanation of everything to try to convince people that what you see is not actually good, it's bad. Or whatever. Or, turn it the other way, like we should sympathize with Palestinians or something. I mean, it's just...
Yeah. Weirdness, isn't it? Certainly, they concluded themselves, they said, we see with physical eyes that he is our offspring and that he was born dark and by blind. But how can he see now? Or who opened his eyes? We don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself. And this is really almost a joke in Greek. Joke being the way it's written. It's really funny. But how? But by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age. Ask him. This is okay. That's sarcasm, right? They don't want to answer this question. In what way or how much at present does he look at? No or not, we see with physical eyes, or then, yes, here's the question word. Who, which, what, why, opened up of him the eyes. Him as, no or not, odem, we see with physical eyes. Him, erosate, make an earnest request of him. He's full age. Heli kiakan, he's full age, in the stage of a full lifespan. He holds through all over of himself. He will make a logical argument. But in what way at present now does he look at? We don't see with physical eyes or who opened up his eyes. I think it's really interesting. We love to translate this word right here, oidame, as to know. And it connotes that in Greek, but it means, have you noticed we've got these multiple words in Greek that we can translate to know? There's probably about 5 of them, right? One of them is we see with physical eyes, odeia. So odia, I see. In other words, why do I know? Because I see it physically, right? There are other words that we have that means because I logically understand it, or I knew it from memory, or from other ways. So in English, we have this word know, which, by the way, in the New Oxford English Dictionary, I think has 100 pages of, definitions to know. It's one of those words, right? And I don't use all those examples. There are all kinds of examples you could put to know in English that you would not know, you would not use under certain circumstances. Just saying, because it's one of those words. It's like love. But in what way does he look at? We don't see with physical eyes, or who opened up his eyes. We don't see him with physical eyes. In other words, he's not there. He's not there with him. You make an earnest request. In other words, you bring him here, right? Because he holds a full age. He himself through will make a logical argument. He'll answer for himself. I think it's really interesting. Why do you think they went to the parents or to the ancestors?
Witness?
Well, there's all kinds of stuff in there, but the big deal is he able to testify?
Can you testify against yourself or for yourself?
Well, there's an interesting question here. Now, we wouldn't think of a person born blind, but kind of ish, okay? So if you brought a person who was blind into your court and said, did you see this crime occur? What's the answer? Can't see. So can he testify? Now, our idea of law is a little bit different than the Greek or the Hebrew idea of law. If you brought in a witness who supposedly couldn't see, but now can see, and supposedly was like, there is no dole, but who's taking care of him? Probably his parents, or maybe he's begging on the street. It's hard to tell exactly because it doesn't say. I don't think it says he was begging. It just says that Jesus found a man that was born blind, and maybe it was in the temple sector. By the way, can you eat teruma if you were blind? No. He's an interesting case because it says that if you're ill or infirm, you're not supposed to take teruma if you're disabled. If you're disabled from birth, can you take Teruma? They probably needed a Mishnah thing there, right, to even answer the question. It's possible he couldn't. The reason he may have been hanging around, let's say this is temporary. Why would this guy be hanging around? His parents went in, right, to eat teruma in the temple, right, to sacrifice. And what's he doing? Cooling his heels. Yeah, we don't know. I wish, you really wish, in English, that's what they tell us. In a novel or a history or whatever, they tell us everything about this guy, probably more than we want to know. But in Greek, it's just giving us the most important parts, the parts of the Logos to tell us. Anyway, so ask him. He's not there. That's why this is the importance of this statement. We don't see him with physical eyes. In other words, he's not there. How they translate it? We know not. We know not. And they put it as an independent clause, right? And then separate with colon. Okay, that's how funny it is in the thing. But anyway, double colon, so 3 independent clauses they threw together. But we don't see him. He's not here. That's the importance. And then what happens is his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had already decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Remember I told you that the good old Samaritan woman, the woman at the well, right? She said stuff that she would have been, if she was in a synagogue, she'd be kicked out. She'd have real issues. These words spake his parents because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Okay, remember it said Messiah. Okay, this is interesting. How the NIV translated versus the King James versus what it says. These, they said, the parents of him, that because they were alarmed or frightened. Botono. They were alarmed or frightened of the Judeans, even now, citing a reason, this is synagogue Theo. They've placed together agreed together, the Judeans, in order that, in case that, 'tis a certain one or thing, anyone or someone, of him, homologous should be together make a logical argument, should make the same logical argument. Homologese should together make a logical argument, the same logical argument. A Christ away from led together the Jewish-led gathering, the synagogue, a hosynagogos, away from. In Greek, when you add an a, that can be, there's 2 ways of looking at it. Mostly it's negation. So aletheia, not false, it means not. Away from, the led together, he would come into being. Genetai. In other words, they would kick him out of the synagogue. So let's see what it says in the Greek. Here's the literal, or the translation of that literal. His parents said these because they were alarmed of the Judeans, assigning a reason. Even now the Judeans had placed together agreed together, in order that in case that if anyone should together make a logical argument, the same logic of him as Christ, away from the led together, he would come into being. So they kick him out of the synagogue. They kick you out. When they say they're going to kick you out of the synagogue, they're kicking you out of the whole Jewish way, except for the temple. You see this? Okay, who are these guys? They are the Pharisees. Who are the Pharisees? They're the rabbis, they're the teachers. They're not the Sadducees. The Sadducees are the priests. So they can't kick them out of the temple, right? They're still allowed temple worship, but they're going to kick them out of the synagogue. And the synagogue is basically the basis for their, I'll make this comparison because I think it's a good comparison. It's like in pantheonic paganism and Mysterion. In pantheonic paganism, you have the temples, you have the gods, you have, in the Gentile society. On the other hand, the Mysterion is your family, your church, your group, your groupies, your homies, the people you hang with, right? Your friends. So guess what? If in the ancient world, the pantheonic paganism, Everybody was a member of a mysterion. Probably a lot of the Jewish people were members of mysterions too, maybe. You know, that was part of the Hellenization that we're talking about. So in their case, they got the temple and the synagogue, which is kind of like their mysterion. They also have a mysterion, maybe they're members of. That's interesting too, right? Which one? A lot of them are coming to the mysterion of Christ. What's really neat, though, in this that I think is really fun is you notice that the NIV calls it Messiah, but the word is Christ. It's Greek. We don't need to know anymore. We don't have to explain about the difference between Messiah in Hebrew and Christ in Greek. Why? We already covered that back at the well, right? The Samaritan woman told us, you know, the Jews called him the Messiah, anointed one, but he's the Christ, the anointed one. Interesting. That is why his parents said, he is of age, ask him. And this is interesting that they give us this. Let's see what it says in the Greek. Therefore, said his parents, he's of age, ask him. Through Ishiat, the parents, auto, they said that or because full age, in the stage of life he holds him, you make an earnest request to him, basically. Okay, so in the Greek, this is interesting in itself. Through it, his parents said, because full age he holds, you make an earnest request to him. Okay, so the big deal here is it is repeated twice, which means it's really important in the context of the writing, or you would never repeat it, to the point that and why do you think that John needed to explain this to his Greek and Roman audience? What do you think the issue? I think the issue has to do with witness, but what do you think?
Well, those people really didn't want to be kicked out of the synagogue, so there was no way they were going to answer anything.
Well, you know, the thing is that in a Greek society, as well as Roman society to a degree, but in Greek society, a man was not a man until you remember what is a man in Greek society? In Athenian, that we know in the Athenian, but we know it's Spartan, the whole 9 yards. When is a man a man?
When you served in the military.
Yeah, when you serve your full term, and they're about 30 years old, and until you serve your full term in the military, you can't own property, you can't own slaves, you can't have a wife, you can't have a business, you can't be part of the Athenian democracy or the councils, you can't participate. This guy was disabled. Okay, in a Greek society and a Roman society comparatively, what do you think happens to those who are disabled?
They're on the fringe of society.
They're,
If he wouldn't have been abandoned, as a baby, if he could tell something's wrong with his eyes.
yeah. His parents were obviously compassionate enough to look after him, take him, which is odd even in ancient cultures, right? In the Greek culture, they could have been thrown into Slepion. How long do you think he'd last there, right? As a babe. Or, you know, the Romans typically abandoned children. In any case, even if his parents took care of him, can he join the military? Can he fight? Can he learn? Can he participate? He cannot be a man. So this, I think, is the reason that it's repeated twice to us, because there, you know, this would be the point at which the reader paused and explained to the Greeks and Romans, you know, in a Hebrew society, it's a little different because they don't do it. And what would all the Greeks and Romans do? They go, what? They don't, you mean they don't have to be 30 and a full member of society before they get married? You know, you mean they could own property? They could, you know, they could be considered a person, kind of ish, you know? You know, they'd explain that. And what we also have here is like I said, he may have been a dependent even in the Jewish society, so unable to witness, unable to be considered a full-fledged member of any part of it, right? How's he going to read? How can he do a bar mitzvah? Can't, right? Can't read. There's no way he could stand up and read before the congregation. It can't happen. So this guy is basically completely isolated within. So, you know, that's, I think, the reason they tell it twice. You know, when we see these repetitions, especially in ancient documents, you got to look deeper at it because there's something more in there. It's really deep. A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Before they asked him straight out, give glory to God by telling the truth, they said, we know this man is a sinner. Oh, this is an interesting thing to start out with. Then again, they called the man that was blind and said to him, give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. Okay. This is interesting. He had told them that it was Jesus that healed him before, right? He said, I don't know who this guy was. He healed me. This is what he did. The guy had gone through his explanation. So they knew it. They emitted a sound, certainly accordingly to the man face. So they got him here from out or among, in the second place for the second time, who had been to raise a smoke, dark my smoke, blind. And they said to him, you give doxin, what evokes good opinion, doxa, to the Theo. We see with physical eyes that are because the antipos, a man face, misses the mark. He is. Accordingly, they emitted a sound to the man from out of the second time who had been darkened by smoke, and they said to him, you give what evokes good opinion, inherent worth, to the God. We see with physical eyes that the man he is misses the mark. The man he is misses the mark. And what do you think they're basing this on, mainly?
About Jesus being a sinner,
Yeah.
because he healed on the Sabbath, he broke
Yeah.
the law.
Probably because of Shabbat, the healing on the Sabbath, which, by the way, is not breaking the law, and they know it, because the Mishnah says you can heal on the Shabbat. They may be, you know, I think that all their Greek hearers, all the hearers of this, get this, even though Paul had to tell us, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Ooh, doxa! All are hamentalos, misses the mark. All, right? Paul had to tell us this, but do you think they know this? It's inherent within the culture and society. They know, and the Mishnah says that the rabbis know, all I can talk about is the rabbis, because remember the Mishnah was kept by the rabbis, by the Pharisees, not by the Sadducees. Sadducees thought the Mishnah was junk. Didn't even do it, right? But they knew it says in Deuteronomy that there is no sacrifice for intentional sin. They knew it. They know there is nothing that they can do about sin. Therefore, the obvious conclusion is all people that are full aged, which goes back to the other point, right? Remember that the Jewish worldview, the Jewish belief is that until a boy is 13 with pubic hair and a girl is 12 with pubic hair, until that point, they are not accountable for their sin. But once they have met that criteria, they are now accountable. That's their idea of age accountability, comes right from Genesis. And so the fact that the parents said he is full aged, right, means he is accountable for his sin, right? The fact that Jesus is not, Jesus obviously went through his bar mitzvah. Jesus obviously knew the stuff. Therefore, Jesus is of full age. And therefore, because of that, he is a sinner too. But you remember the question that was originally asked by the disciples that caused this whole situation to occur way at the beginning of 9? What did the disciples ask?
Who sinned?
Who sinned? His parents or him? He couldn't have sinned. It's impossible. He wasn't even born yet, right? And we heard from the parents. There's a lot about sinning in this. It's really interesting. Accordingly, they made a sound to the man from out the second time who had been darkened by smoke, and they said to him, you give what evokes good opinion to the God. We see with physical eyes that the man he is misses the mark. And this is the answer. Which this guy, even though he had been blind, obviously was listening. He was he's like the woman at the well. Maybe this guy could be the second smartest, you know? He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know is I was blind, but now I see. There's more to this, obviously, right? The words, like I said, the no words here, he answered and said, whether he was a sinner or no, I know not. I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. Now let's see what the words say. He concluded for himself, so he thought about it. He just didn't pop it off, you know. The Greeks would love this. You know, he concluded for himself, certainly accordingly, that one there, if misses the mark, he is, no or not, I stare at. I stare at. In other words, I don't see. I can't see. Now this is ironic because he just was able to see. I don't stare at. One I stare at, that or because, to raise the smoke, hence I being, just now, at this moment, I look at. This is in, here, let's look at in the correct English sense. Certainly, he concluded for himself, if that one there, he is missing the mark, I don't stare at. I don't see it. I don't see that he's missing the mark. This is an interesting statement in itself. I stare at, because dark in my smoke, I being, just now, I look at. Do you see the irony in this? This is beautiful Greek satire. Because what he's saying is, I don't see it, but right now I can see. I can look at the world. But what I see in the world is not this guy missing the mark. I mean, this is completely appropriate in your answer to the question. Okay, so how can someone who's missing the mark do what? He hit the target, right? I want to ask you a question. This is so obvious. It's beautiful. In healing this guy, Jesus was aiming at the mark of healing. And what did he do? Bullseye. Yeah. Look at these words. Missing the mark. Now, think about this. It's like a blind guy trying to hit a target. And this is the implication that you're getting from this. I even wish he put more, and he could have. Like, remember Paul writing about missing the mark and talking about it in that context of actually using weapons or weapons. We saw a little bit in Hebrew. The point here is that's the implication. Okay, he's not blind trying to hit the mark. He was aiming and he hit the mark. He didn't miss the mark. I can see. This is like amazing. And like I said, the irony is kind of lost on us because in the Greek, Greek is concrete. And so we have to throw in all these no words. I know, I see, right? But look at the different words that are used. Stare at, look at, I stare at. And yet we translate almost all these into no, or very simple words. This is perfect Greek word use. I don't stare at missing the mark. I stare at because I look at. I stare because I can see. This is just beautiful. And then they asked him, what did he do to you? How do you open your eyes? Oh, okay. Again, this is almost funny. Why is this funny? Because what did he already do when they asked him the first time? this is a setup, okay? This is like a comedy. Okay, you know, I love to attribute a little comedy to this because I think that this is awesome, excellent writing in Greek, but it's also beautiful recitation of history, right? So I think all this happened exactly the way it's written. And this guy obviously had really perfected his verbal, even though he couldn't see. You've seen this, right? People that can't see many times, their hearing, their verbal skills, their skills are really high level. This guy obviously had a lot of time thinking about stuff. And I think he is, like I said, I'm going to put him at this point right underneath the woman at the well, because this guy has just the beautiful things to say. She could not have said this because they would have probably mobbed her and beaten her. But he can say it because he's a man of full-fledged age, right? And now he can see. Maybe not strong enough to defend himself, but at least he's, you know, a man in their culture and can fight it back. Anyway, they said, certainly according to him, who, which, why he had made her done to you, in what way or how, much opened up of you the eyes. Accordingly, they said to him, what he had done to you, in what way he opened up your eyes. And by the way, they already asked this question. This is a classic interrogation technique. You use it all the time to try to get victims to change their story or to commit perjury. You know, this is the way certain our government officials do it. You know, they'll ask you, you know, you give them a flippant answer, they'll ask you again, and you give them a more flippant answer, and they write down every word you say, and they say, are you sure, you know, because you told us something different? Oh, it's perjury. Oh, you know, you're lying to us. He answered, I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? It's a little bit different in the Greek, but I think the irony is caught here. It's a beautiful irony. He answered them, I have told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore would ye hear it again? Will you also be his disciples? Okay. He concluded for himself. He thought about it. I love it when they think about it. To them, I said to you, even now, and or not you have heard, you didn't hear me, who, which, or what, why, anew, you, thelethe, you will or desire, this is a very strong word, thelethe, to hear, not or less, that's a qualified negation, and of you, you will or desire, of him, disciples, learners, were caused to be. He concluded for himself to them, I said to you even now, and you have not heard. I said to you even now, and you have not heard. You're not listening to me. Speak to the hand that your ears ain't listening, right? Why anew do you not desire to hear? Why anew do you not desire to hear? Yeah, would you hear it again? Why anew do you not desire to hear? That's very clear in the Greek. It's not, would you hear it again? It's, why do you not desire to hear? Why are you not listening to what I'm saying, my arguments? And you will or desire, his learners were caused to be. In other words, he's making a statement. You obviously want to be his disciples, or you wouldn't do what?
Keep asking.
Keep asking. Yeah. You know, this is a turnabout, right? This is a beautiful turnabout.
It just kind of strikes me like a chess game. He just put them in check. It's like they weren't expecting.
Yeah.
Just turn the tables on them. It's like they're trying to get him to incriminate, and he says, "Well, if you keep asking me, you must have a different motive than what you appear to have." So.
Yeah, you know, the thing that gets me about this is a rhetorical argument in the most classic Greek dialogue sense, right? This is a beautiful classic rhetorical argument. It's like you're supposed to have a debate class, right? And this is the cha-ching moment when the guy in the debate gives the slam that the other guy can't recover from at all. There's no recovery. You're done, right? And when you look at it that way, you can see the Greek mind, right? The Greeks are sitting there and they're salivating for this. This is what they live for. They live for this rhetorical dialogue, this, the philosophical, logical stuff, right? And they don't have, if they had geometry and algebra, they would have been loving life. They probably wouldn't have come out of their houses because they'd spend all their time trying to figure out problems, right? Luckily, they didn't, and they actually, well, kind of built stuff-ish until the Romans came, and the Romans figured out how to make all their stuff work, right? The poor Greeks had great ideas, but never made it work right, like they should have, right? But the Romans, they took it. So anyway, he concluded himself to them, I said to you even now, and you have not heard. Why anew do you not desire to hear? And you will or desire his learners were caused to be. This is the answer. They hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. Okay, what did they just do?
I don't know.
Ad hominem.
And now the ad hominem attacks.
They're gonna change the whole argument, right? That's the thing. Then they reviled him. They said, thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciple. Look, did he ever say he was his disciple? Did he ever? No. Total ad hominem attacks, total things. And they said harsh things. That's what it means in Greek. They said harsh things. They made vulnerable assaults to revile, to spew bitter, tasteless statements, using mean-spirited, insulting words to demoralize. The Greek has a word for this, okay?
One word.
Which means what? What does that mean when you have one word for a concept like this? Yeah, you need it.
They did it a lot.
You need it. Yeah, they did it. They used it, right? So if you're on the playground and the playground bully is giving you a hard time, you would Eliodor son to him. They would say harsh things, right? Revile, insulting words, right? And what's even cooler is they didn't even tell us what all the words were, right? It's kind of like when you're writing a novel and you say, and she swore. Right? You don't tell them what she swore. You can make that up in your mind, but you say that, right? And that's even better than saying that they swore, because you don't know what they said. You just knew that they said mean-spirited things to him, so he doesn't need to tell us. I mean, the Greeks are going, yeah, it's so cool. He won. He just won. And they said, you, a learner, you are of that one there. We, but of Moses. We are learners. And they said harsh things, made verbal insults to him. And they said, you are a learner, disciple of that one there, but we are learners, disciples of Moses. Now, where does this go back to? You remember what this goes back to?
They said, children. Who are you? We're children of Abraham or something.
Yeah. They changed their pitch. Before they were children of Abraham, now they are disciples of Moses. They decided, you see this? The hearers know this. This is a huge change. We just go, oh, well, now they're disciples of Moses. But we don't even think about it. They were calling themselves children of Abraham before, right?
Well, don't they want to claim the lineage and prestige of both, don't they? I mean, like, we are from these,
The guy who
Abraham
got
and
the law.
Moses and,
Well, you remember,
we're ethnically from Abraham and culturally and legally, like the religious law from Moses, like we got it all.
well, I don't disagree with you, but you see what happened to them when they claimed to be children of Abraham last time? What did Jesus do to them? He annihilated them. They said, well, we're children of Abraham. And Jesus basically beat them with it. And so now they've decided, what are they going to do?
Change that.
Yeah, we're going to change our tactics, because last time that Jesus guy, when we said this, and if this guy really is his learner, his disciple, now we know the disciples are just not that bright. We wish they were smarter, right? But the Pharisees are like thinking, we haven't confronted one of these. Okay, why do you think they haven't confronted one of his disciples?
What an argument.
And Jesus is really smart. Jesus is not going to let those disciples at this point try to defend themselves from the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You're done, dudes. Listen, just learn, just figure it out, and we're going to find it. Eventually I'll send you the Holy Spirit, right? This will help you out because I know you're not there, right? And they're not Greek. They all have Greek names, most of them, but they're not Greek. And the Greek, the Pharisees are steeped in both the Hebraic arguments and the Greek arguments. So far, they're losing out big time with the Greek arguments, even to a blind guy and, the Samaritan woman, which could toast them, right? She could run around them because she obviously had more knowledge of their own, Torah than they did to a degree, right? I mean, she was really bright about some of this stuff. This guy has obviously been listening. He's got really good Greek sense and is, figuring this stuff out. And then the Pharisees are trying to change their tactics, which I think is really funny. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. Okay, what was the whole argument in the previous chapter?
Where did Jesus come from?
Yep.
And the answer was, we don't know where he comes from, although they knew where he came from, right? They knew. He was a rabbi from Capernaum, and all the readers, because they knew the previous Gospels, knew that he was born in Bethlehem, which is a great joke, right? And you'd think by this time, what do you think the Pharisees know? Why do you think they won't admit that they know where he comes from?
They've probably been set straight by somebody who said, no, hey, he was born in Bethlehem.
I think they were.
Yeah.
But why won't confess it?
Well, because the Messiah was prophesied to be from Bethlehem.
Right, and if they confess it,
Right.
if they say, we know where he comes from, what did they just do?
They added evidence, that he
Yeah.
was Christ.
He could be the Christ, because that was their whole argument. He's not the Christ because we don't know where he comes from. But if they know where he comes from, and by the way, did he tell them where he came from? He told them over and over again, I came from God. I came from God. I came from God. And they're like, they're grumbling. You can hear them grumbling the whole time. We're almost out of time. We know that God spake to Moses. As for this fellow, we know not whence he is. We see with physical eyes. See, we know. We see with physical eyes that Moses has uttered words, the God, he, she, it, debaruk, or that we see with physical eyes from which or what place he is. Why do they see with physical eyes? We see with physical eyes that the Theos has uttered words to Moses. Why do they see with physical eyes that the Theos uttered to Moses? How do they know?
The writings?
Yeah, the writings. Yeah, the burning bush is in it, but they know because of the writings, because of the Torah, right? The Torah and the Tanakh.
God, we read it.
Right.
We know what it says.
Exactly. We see it. We see with physical eyes, which is a beautiful argument. Now, that obviously excludes at this point the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is not written down yet. I love it. I love it. We see with physical eyes that the Theos has uttered words to Moses, but we do not see with physical eyes one place he is. They don't see with physical eyes. But do they know? Yeah, do you see this equivocation in here? The Greek readers, the Greek hearers know immediately that, yeah, they don't see with physical eyes, but they sure know. This is really interesting, isn't it? Anyway, we have to stop there, but thank you, Father, for your word. I pray you look after us this week. Your name we pray, amen. And no class next Sunday. But I'll give you extra special one after.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely have to write.
And Ann, I'm just gonna go to the website for Operation Christmas, and I'm